I am not trying to say that complex billing shouldn't exist, especially when 3PLs are trying to cater to several customers, each with their own requirements. I think 3PLs would be doing themselves a disservice by not trying to make as much money as they can, especially in the industry where margins are already low as is. So I think what we lack are the tools to support that level of complexity and the flexibility that 3PLs actually need.
Welcome to Blue Ocean by Startups. Each episode, I sit down with leaders in consumer brand supply chain, finance, and CX to talk about the problems they're facing and the solutions they're using or building. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Cushing, the founder of StartOps. With me here today is Mohnish Chakravarti, founder and CEO of Rails. Welcome, Mohnish.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Charles.
So we've got a lot of exciting stuff to get into today. Just to kick off, though, for everyone's context, can you give us the quick one-liner on what Rails is and the problem it's solving?
Rails streamlines and automates the process of creating invoices and making sure that your bills that are being sent to you by your suppliers are correct for third-party logistics companies.
It's a really interesting problem space. We're going to get very deep into the weeds on the different sort of points of friction in this process, but maybe just take me back to the beginning. What was your career before starting this company, and how did you find your way to wanting to solve the problems in this space?
I studied industrial engineering and operations research in college, thinking I'd never use that degree at all. But my first job out of college was at another supply chain startup called Stored. I was in charge of building internal tools for increasing efficiencies for our operations team. While I was there, Stored grew from about 35, 40 people to almost 700, 800 people. So throughout the process, I got to learn a lot more about things that work when you're a small company and things that break when you grow very quickly. And billing was one of the things that I worked on and spent a lot of time trying to solve at Stored. I realized that the inefficiencies not being caused by one problem, but a combination of many different problems that are not only difficult to solve at a company like Stored, but many other 3PLs as well that I spoke to. And that's what led me to leave and start Rails.
So you left Stored knowing this is what you wanted to do and to work on.
Yes, I spent a good bit of 6 to 7 months just trying to figure out a way for us to make billing more efficient and less error prone at Stored, and at the same time help our operations and accounting teams get more visibility into what charges are being used to actually create bills, how charges are being created, and how they are being sent out to customers on a timely manner.
My understanding is that this is a problem that affects like a very specific group of people, but for those people, it can be extremely painful. For the 3PLs themselves, it can be expensive. Maybe just as a starting point, could you walk us through the life of an invoice for a typical 3PL? What are all the different steps that need to happen along the path? And what are the friction points that exist at each step typically today?
I'm happy to do so, but I think the one thing that we should probably keep in mind as we walk through the life cycle of creating an invoice is that third-party logistics companies very often work with brands and retailers that are very different from one another. Every single 3PL operator that I've talked to has essentially told me that running a successful 3PL business is a game of managing exceptions. And how that relates to invoicing is that when you go and sell to a small brand that's just starting out on Shopify, they might have many different requirements than what a big retailer trying to do FBA, among many other things. In trying to cater their needs while balancing your own business interests, what 3PLs end up doing is they end up creating many different custom pricing agreements for every single client that they work with. I'm talking about different kinds of charges based on different scenarios for shipping, different storage charges based on how frequently your inventory is moving through their warehouse, so on and so forth. So that first step in itself is where a lot of these complexities start boiling up. Here's how the life cycle of an invoice looks like. At the end of the billing period, that could be the end of the week or end of the month, depending on individual contracts that a 3PL has with their customers. The accountant in charge of creating the bills would log into the warehouse management system and export a bunch of different reports that would give them an understanding of all of the services or activities that were carried out at the warehouse for that customer. They would download these Excel files and then upload them to a larger Excel sheet that would have formulas that would encode all of the billing agreements that the 3PL has in place with the client. And then from there, it's just a game of transforming data on Excel sheets to figure out whether the charge is applied correctly or not. This can be an extremely time-consuming process, as the accountant at the 3PL has to do this individually for every single customer that they work with. They have to load them into different Excel sheets. They have to apply different formulas over and over again. This leads to a lot of avenues for errors being introduced as well. And that's really what lengthens this life cycle of an invoice being generated and sent. A lot of times, invoice generation in itself doesn't take a lot of time, but then auditing the invoice to make sure that it's actually correct before sending it to a client is what ends up taking the most amount of time. At the end of this process, a 3PL might be 80-90% certain that the invoice is correct. They're never 100% certain because it's all being done one by one, following a slightly different process every single time to handle any exceptions that may have occurred during the billing period. And they're sending out these invoices through an ERP system or an accounting system like QuickBooks or NetSuite. Once the invoice gets sent to them, typically the brand or retailer will come back with many different questions because oftentimes these invoices aren't created with a lot of detail. And then there's a lot of back and forth that ensues, after which finally the 3PL gets paid.
So if we were to sort of map out the flow, it's like figuring out how much needs to get billed is really complicated. Once you have that, generating the bill itself is like relatively straightforward. Explaining how the bill was created is really complicated, and then paying it is relatively straightforward. Is that like a fair readback?
It really depends on how you structure your agreements with your clients, right? There are 3PLs or 3PL operators that I have talked to that have the most complex pricing agreements that I've ever seen. They have very complex billing agreements to protect margin and optimize their profit wherever possible. If you are running that kind of a 3PL or working with that kind of a 3PL, then it becomes extremely hard to calculate what the costs are to begin with, because it often involves transforming data 5 or 6 or 7 times. That can often be a challenge. It really just depends on how the 3PL has decided to charge their client, because that can complicate the process way too much.
What does the state of the art look like in terms of how a 3PL even documents that series of data transformations that needs to happen, presumably in Excel? What does that even look like?
So there's a couple of different options that a 3PL has to document these processes and to some extent automate them as well. There are some really awesome warehouse management systems out there that have their own billing modules. They may be flexible enough or inflexible for your needs. That's a separate discussion to be had, but there are warehouse management systems out there that let you automate billing based on all of the data that is being captured within the warehouse management system. If you capture data out of the warehouse management system, then you're responsible for creating bills for that activity. But as long as it's been captured within the warehouse management system, there are systems out there that will create bills automatically for you. Besides that, there's really 2 popular options that we've seen, or 2 very common options we've seen. Number one is codifying your agreements as much as possible in Excel sheets. This really works well if you have a structured process in place to come up with your agreements. If you're just quoting every single brand or retailer that you work with one by one, then odds are that this process will not work. But there are 3PLs out there that have a very formulaic approach to how they charge their customers. If that is the case, then codifying contracts in an Excel sheet or any other programmable environment works very well. And that's what we've seen. And then the third option is just outsourcing all of it. So there are many different services that work explicitly just handle billing for you, the same way factoring service would handle billing for trucking companies. So you just give them all of the data and they worry about it. So that's how I've seen people deal with structuring and storing and using this information.
Is it a common problem that invoice generation is made more difficult by a bad WMS or lack of compliance with the WMS?
I 100% agree that billing can be simplified significantly if you store data in a certain way. I like to think of your infrastructure or how you set up your WMS as a base of the pyramid, right? If you just enter data without a lot of structure or control over how it is being stored, how it is being recorded or transmitted to other systems, then you're going to have a very difficult time doing anything off of it. I constantly advocate to my customers whenever they come to us and say, hey, we want to build things in a certain way. My number one question to them is, do you know how to actually get this information for me from the warehouse management system. Like if you were to build the customer for this certain service or in the way that you want them to manually, could you do it today? 99% of the times the answer is no, because they haven't structured their WMS to capture data that they want or follow certain best practices in storing data or transmitting data. So I 100% agree that the complexities that arise with billing can be made simpler if they were to pay extra attention to storing data or recording data in a certain way. That's not the entire solution to the problem, but it plays a very big role in how difficult billing can get for you later down the line.
Are you of the view that billing shouldn't be complex, or is the problem that the right tools to do complex billing don't exist yet, or that's basically what you're trying to solve?
I am not trying to say that complex billing shouldn't exist, especially when 3PLs are trying to cater to several customers, each with their own requirements. I think 3PLs would be doing themselves a disservice by not trying to, make as much money as they can, especially in the industry where margins are already low as is. So I think what we lack are the tools to support that level of complexity and the flexibility that 3PLs actually need. A lot of billing systems or a lot of the ways people approach this problem has been very rigid in nature. They expect data to come out a certain way. They expect to do things a certain way. There haven't been systems built that give users the tools that they need to work with the kind of complexity and flexibility that they actually expect.
Maybe we could actually just go one level deeper. I mean, we keep talking about these sort of complex, exotic billing structures, but what are some of the things that 3PLs can't easily do today or try to do today that you are trying to make easier?
So let's start with storage pricing. I think that's a pretty simple one. Typically, a 3PL charges their customers for storage based on location occupied in the warehouse. If you're a brand listening to this, you might be familiar with the term pallets, bins, and you might have a per pallet charge or a per bin charge. Some of the 3PLs that we work with are trying to incentivize their customers to move inventory through their warehouse faster and not store inventory for too long by charging them extra the longer inventory is stored at the warehouse. So think of it this way. If your inventory is moving pretty quickly and it is received at the warehouse and goes out of the warehouse in 1 week, then they might not charge you anything for it because you're being incentivized to not hold up space at the warehouse. But if it stays at the warehouse for, say, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, then it's eating up space for the 3PL that they could be using for another customer. And in that case, what the 3PL wants to do is incrementally charge them more money the longer their inventory is being held at the warehouse. Now, that is something you cannot do with billing solutions that are typically found in 3PLs. It's something that 3PLs have struggled to structure data for because there's implications on how inventory is being tracked from the moment it is received in the warehouse. It has implications on how locations are being defined at a warehouse. And then it has implications on what happens to a location after inventory is finally moved from the warehouse as well. So there's a lot of data considerations as well as billing considerations that they need to take into account. The charges for pallets or bins or storage is done on a monthly basis. But then if you are considering building a system that incentivizes people to move inventory faster, maybe you want to look at storage from the point of view of inventory being moved through the warehouse in terms of orders, right? So do you start charging customers daily? Do you start charging them weekly? Because if you're just looking at this data on a monthly basis, you're maybe gaining 2 or 3 more % back in terms of return on investment. But if you look at it daily or weekly, then there might be a lot more money to be made using a system like this. So that is one example of a complex billing structure that our users are thinking about, especially in peak season when there's going to be a large influx of orders. Brands and retailers want to make sure that they have insurance against that large influx by storing inventory at the warehouse, but 3PLs don't want to store a significant amount of inventory and block space that might be used by another client. So that's one example. The other example is shipping can get pretty complex. Shipping charges obviously are a big black box for, brands and retailers themselves, and then 3PLs as well. What typically happens, and this happens more frequently during peak season, is that 3PLs are levied charges in the form of adjustments by their carriers a couple of days after the shipment is actually delivered. We've seen a lot of 3PLs bill their clients based on the charge that is quoted to them when the label is actually created, because they do not want to wait until the shipment has been delivered and then wait for another 7-8 days for the bill to show up to actually bill them, because that extends the amount of time that they actually have to wait for the bill to get paid. What we've seen a lot of 3PLs do is we've seen them bill their clients based on the charge that is quoted and recorded in the warehouse management system, and then forget about shipping. During peak season, more frequently than the rest of the year, carriers levy additional charges that show up on your bill a couple of weeks, couple of months, maybe even a quarter or two later. And then you're left wondering, well, what do I do with all of these charges that I should have charged my customer? That whole process of reconciling bills and figuring out what the adjustments have been made, which shipment they apply to, is an extremely time-consuming and difficult process, because every carrier has their own billing portals that you have to log into and then download different files in different formats and stitch together with your warehouse management system reports. And so that is one thing our customers are coming back to us and asking, and 3PLs that we just talked to are asking us as well, is, hey, we know this is a problem. We don't deal with it because we don't know where to start. Is there a way for us to automatically identify these adjustments and then charge our clients for it? And so that's another example of users trying to bill their clients for complex billing needs. And we haven't even gotten into volume-based discount, tier pricing, and all of the other stuff that 3PLs are now starting to do to optimize their margins.
Those are some great examples. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe just looking at your tool, take us through the capabilities. Like, what are the modules? Like, what parts of that process that we described are you trying to bite off? Which ones are you leaving to other systems? And where are you integrating with existing systems or pulling data from existing systems versus replacing something that 3PL might be using today?
Rails' goal is to streamline and automate billing for 3PLs. And the way we do that is by trying to eliminate the human out of the process as much as possible. We start by build integrations with warehouse management systems and carriers to automatically bring in all of the data that you actually need to create all of your bills. We're eliminating the process of an accountant logging into the WMS, downloading, exporting reports, and doing the same with every different carrier system that they work with on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. By doing so, we're not only saving them a lot of time, but we're also minimizing the possibility of billing errors due to data just being wrong. Once we automatically bring in all of this data, which, by the way, we bring in on an event-driven basis, so we don't export data, we just integrate with APIs or webhooks and bring data as the updates are being made in the warehouse management system. We give users the ability to very flexibly codify their client pricing agreements. So we have a system that we've built over several different months that is a lot more flexible than automated billing solutions that exist in warehouse management systems or outside of it. Essentially, the way we look at it is we take a unit of operation that may have occurred. Could be a inventory change, could be an outbound order, could be a receiving event as well. And we essentially give our users the ability to either create conditions or charges based on any different attribute that may be associated with it. Think of outbound shipping. We give our users the ability to create volume pricing based on the number of orders that they've actually shipped, because that is an attribute that can be easily calculated.
How long does this take to get set up? Is it pretty low touch? The user just plugs their tools in and everything sort of happens automatically, or is there still some degree of integration or customization that needs to happen per client?
So you can get set up on Rails and start generating invoices the following week. All you have to do is log into our app, connect your accounts, and then set up the rules. The last part, setting up the rules, is what might end up taking you more or less time depending on how complex your billing needs actually are. We've worked with clients that have taken about a month to get onboarded just because their billing has been super, super complex. So they've needed more time to set up all of the rules and charges. And we've also worked with clients that we onboarded on a Thursday and generated their bills on a Sunday. So it really depends on how you bill your clients.
For you guys, you're dealing with both operational data and financial data, and there just still somehow aren't great systems that handle both most of the time. Say a piece of data is missing or it's wrong in the stream system. How are you guys thinking about that systematically, from the user's perspective?
We think of it in a couple of different ways. Number one is when it comes to billing, we give our users as much control as possible. So we're not just a system that automates everything and says, hey, if there's any exceptions, sorry, you have to deal with it. We have tried taking measures against it, right? Number one is build something that is flexible enough to capture all of your requirements. Number two is give the users the ability to update or edit or add any charges if they want to before the invoice actually exported to their ERP or accounting system. I'm of the opinion that exceptions are always going to be the case, and achieving 100% automation over financial tasks such as billing or reconciliation will never be possible just because of how things happen or things work at a 3PL. So what we're trying to do is automate 95, 99% of the absolute hard and time consuming work that it does take an accountant at a 3PL to do. And then they're left focusing on just handling the 1% of exceptions. So we flag exceptions. We give them the ability to basically set up configurations and say, okay, these are things that we want to highlight and then not automatically send out. Whenever an invoice is open, we let them add charges, edit charges to all of the automation. Despite all of the automation that we've already done, we try to meet the user, in this case, the accountant at the 3PL. And we're trying to automate as much of the processes as we can. And then what cannot be automated, we give them tools to very easily make those updates instead of having to export the report and do everything outside themselves. So that's one way that we deal with this problem of garbage in, garbage out. Yes, the second thing is it's not a technical solution. We just try to educate the customer on what needs to be done. When users come to us with a request to build their clients in a certain way and ask us to build a system that supports it, we first try to work with them and understand if they are recording data the same way. Because from a technical perspective, building a system to do anything is the easy part, right? You can build a system that handles 50 exceptions. It's just an if-else statement to look for all of the 50 cases that you're looking at. But from an operational point of view, if you do not fix the underlying solution and just keep building on top of the wrong assumptions that you might have made about how things might work, then it's going to not only impede your flexibility, but it's also going to make things a lot more difficult to audit operational data, audit financial data. Because at the end of the day, automation and streamlining or consolidating these processes is just a pathway to optimizing all of the decisions that they make. My goal with automation or streamlining is to make sure that at the end of the day, users can use all of this data and use all of this information to optimize their processes. We actually spend a lot of time working with the user in almost a consulting role, I would say, helping them understand whether or not certain things are being done in the right way and whether they should change their operational processes to make things simpler for billing.
It seems obvious just from listening to you that, okay, someone plugs in Rails, there's going to be some amount of just direct cost savings because someone previously was having to reformat 50 Excel spreadsheets and they're not doing it anymore. I'm guessing there's also probably some lift on just time to receive funds. Just you can get invoices out the door. How do you think about the different types of leverage that a 3PL gets from this beyond just sort of basic cost analysis?
There's many different ways that a streamlined billing solution can actually not only save you money, but make you money. Let's get the obvious ones out of the way. Saving accounting hours. We've seen people save up to 20 plus hours in a week just creating invoices. We've minimized billing errors that have existed on an invoice. We've seen invoices where up to 10% of the total invoice amount has been incorrect, and we're bringing that down close to zero. I mean, obviously, handling exceptions is something that the user has to take care of. Again, in that case of 99% automation and 1% where they have to update charges, but we're significantly reducing the errors that occur as a result of data being manipulated incorrectly or these charge calculations being done wrong. Then the third one that you rightly pointed out is that there is significant relief on the cash flow. You're sending out bills much faster, you're getting paid much faster with a lot less questions asked by your client because billing is super transparent. There's a lot of detail that is now being sent to your customers through the files that we generate and the invoices that we generate in your accounting systems. For example, some of the 3PLs that we work with, they were charging their clients on a weekly basis, monthly basis, but sometimes taking 10 to 15 days to send out these invoices that they generate after the billing period was over. Now they're sending them out within 2 to 3 days. Obviously, there's still work to be done. In an ideal world, what I'd like to hear is a billing period was completed 12 a.m. yesterday. Bills were out at 2 p.m. today. That's what I'd love to hear, and that's what we're working towards. Then there's these longer-term strategic benefits as well. If you have a billing system in place that is set up to be extremely flexible and handle all requirements, your account managers or your sales team can feel more confident to go out and sell more custom pricing that makes you a lot more competitive, right? Or optimizes your margin and profits in many more cases. They're not bound by restrictions on what the operations teams or the accounting teams tells them. Hey, don't go out and sell this because we just cannot capture this data. They can go out and be more empowered to sell whatever it is that they want because the billing system is flexible enough to do it. And the data that it's built on top of is clean enough and it's robust. and is trustworthy. So that's another benefit. There's just so much increase in flexibility that can be used to win more business or charge your business more optimally. And then the last thing, which I think is the most important thing, is that there is a lot of intelligence that lies in this data that previously 3PLs have not been able to use, right? In many operational systems that 3PLs use, the operational data is often siloed away from financial data. And it's very hard to combine both of them together because of the challenges that exist with the interoperability of the systems, and then also how data is represented in both of those systems. By consolidating all of this data into a single place, you're now setting yourself up for success to actually do analysis on, hey, what am I making per service per customer? What is my unit level cost or margin or profit? And once you have these decisions, and then you can have such an easier time more optimally structuring your pricing agreements with your clients, more optimally negotiating contracts with your suppliers, because all of this data is in a single place, ready for you to make decisions on.
As you're talking there, like just thinking about even having like a really good handle on where your own operational costs are sort of being stacked onto the business, that could inform a decision about something like whether to automate part of your warehouse process. It seems really powerful to have.
Yeah, it's even as simple as saying, hey, 90% of our West Coast clients, for some reason, we're using FedEx because of whatever rate shopping is set up in our warehouse management system. But it looks like on reviewing our contract with UPS, that might actually be cheaper. Might be a simple just switching of your rate. I mean, that might be an insight that is generated by the system of yours or by the analysis that you do by having both all of this data in one single place. And that might save you tens of thousands of dollars in a week. I think there's a wealth of data that is not being used currently or inaccessible to 3PLs just because of the fact that their warehouse management system doesn't necessarily interact well with their ERP or their accounting system.
You guys have obviously built like a very robust platform already, but is there anything that's working on now or that's on the roadmap that you're particularly excited about introducing into the tool?
Yeah, very soon we are going to have the ability to automatically add adjustments that are sent to 3PLs by their carriers on client invoices. So accountants are not going to have to download all of these carrier bills and then figure out what's different and not different and then add that to an invoice. We'll be doing all of that automatically. And then another thing that we're really excited about is making our billing system more transparent. We receive all of the updates as they happen, but what we think would be super cool is to show all of that billing data to clients in real time as well. So, hey, I mean, let's say you're a warehouse associate is just got assigned to an order fees applied. They finish picking the order 2 minutes later, the shipping fees are applied. It gets sent out, that's your final order. Brands and retailers have visibility to their costs in real time. They don't have to wait until the end of the week or end of the month to actually find out what their bill is. They're kind of getting an understanding of what their bill is going to be in real time. There's a lot of thinking that needs to be done there, but we have the system in place to start building that. So that would be super, super cool to build.
It definitely seems like that's the direction a lot of these sort of finance tools are going. And again, what seems almost absurd today, looking at the sort of state of finance, I agree will probably become the default. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you again so much for joining us, Mohnish.
No problem. It was nice to be here.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to learn more about Rails, we'll be linking details in the show notes and hope to catch you next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is produced by StartOps, a growing collection of resources for operations leaders at e-commerce brands. A few of the things we built include a growing, vendor-free Slack community for operators to ask their most important questions and get answers from trusted peers, a job board that curates jobs from 1,500 modern brands, a media hub that includes this podcast, as well as articles and templates on a variety of operations topics, and a comprehensive directory of the software and services used by our community members. If you want to learn more, head to startops.network. And to keep up with the latest information from StartOps, or catch the most recent episodes of Blue Ocean, follow the StartOps page on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening and hope to catch you next episode.